don't forget to purchase your copy of Ink to Paper, Volume 6. It was published and released on Amazon right before Christmas, and it has all of our winning poems throughout the whole year for 2021. So you can get that either from me or from Amazon, whichever is the most convenient. Just let me know. But that is published and ready to go. So let me introduce to you John. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself. I didn't know, I know a lot of little things about you, but I didn't know exactly what you wanted me to emphasize. So I'm going to let you toot your horn and then introduce your topic about Amanda Gorman.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Hi, everybody. Glad to see new faces and returning faces, of course. A little bit about me. I am a tech consultant working out of Castleton at a company called Mosier Consulting. I studied German literature and poetry in college and undergrad before getting a tech degree. I've always enjoyed poetry and lyrics, so that's part of why I'm here and why I write. So without further ado, I will get the presentation pulled up. Here we go. Everybody seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes. Call us what we carry.
Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman is the name of the book that I think I was on a wait list on Amazon for probably an entire year for it to be released. It was probably more like 8 months, but all that notwithstanding, it's a great collection of books. If you want to check out Amanda's work, her website's at the bottom of the presentation, theamandagorman.com. And I'll just get right to it. So Amanda Gorman is one of the, I would say, shining stars of younger poets in the country at the moment. She's, been writing for a long time for someone for her age. I'll get into when she was born and whatnot here in a moment. But as you can see, this is lifted right from her website. It includes, all the information such as people she's performed for and all the occasions that she's had to be, able to share her voice, which I've always found just amazing to see someone have such a rise. So the rise of Amanda Gorman, she was born in 1998. Now, I was born in 93 and she's already on the world stage. So that's always a funny thought for someone, but, she's, a lot of her messaging is focused on, issues of oppression, feminism, race, marginalization, the African diaspora. And she has quite a sense of humor. Which I think I mentioned here in a bit that she is on the Good News show at one point with John Krasinski, which is supposed to be like a only good news kind of program. So only things that are uplifting or wholesome, more or less. But Amanda Gorman was chosen as the first Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles in 2014. She became the first youth poet to open the literary session for the Library of Congress in 2017. And, MTV is not all that it used to be, but every once in a while they do well. And she read on MTV, which, I think is much better than the typical, reality TV they show on there now. So it's always nice to see that too. So on the stage again and again, like I said a minute ago, she appeared on Some Good News with John Krasinski. I would encourage you to look into that and find it. It's very entertaining. And the reason why I know about her was because of her inauguration at, she was at the inauguration. She was the selected poet and the youngest poet to be selected to read her poetry at a presidential inauguration in our country's history. And sore topic, but after January 6th, she amended her poem's wording because I think in that moment, as the person who is about to be on the world stage, I think you're allowed to take liberties with your own writing, right? If you were in the position to be standing before the entire country and the world, and you had already written a poem, I think all of us would take some time to, reframe the language when something as huge as that happened. Now, I realized I could just play the video for you, which is of the inaugural poem. I don't really want to do that, just because we've all seen it, and also it's annoying for online stuff, copyright and whatnot. So if you'd like, I can read it. It's a fairly long one. If not, we can just move into the analysis. It's up to you guys. What do we think?
Read it.
All right. And I'll be streaming it here so you can read it as well. Is that a good size for everybody? All right. So, The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We brave the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms of notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet, dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tried, as we retired, we tried. And that will forever be tied together victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than pride we inherit. It's the past we stepped into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy, and this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know in our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation, become the future. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the golden hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake rim cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. In every nook of our nation, in every corner of every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn balloons as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. End of poem.
Good job.
That was a really good read, John.
It's a lot of words, right? But the thing that makes poetry so wonderful and moving is how different it can be depending on who's saying it. You know, when I was reading that, I was thinking a lot about how she presented it, but I wanted to bring what little of my voice I could to someone else's words. I've always found that part of dictating someone else's work fascinating. But you know, one of the things about poetry, other than the voice speaking it or the way it's presented on the page, is the structure and function of the piece, right? In this case, I'm just going to talk about rhyme real quick. You know, it's not heavy on a rhyme scheme, but it uses a lot of rhyme. We see a playful rhyme section in the beginning where you have shade and wade, beast and peace, just is and justice. Like, it's a half rhyme, slant rhyme, whatever you want to call it, but she's following a format. Now, after this part, more of the poem's rhyme comes through internal rhyme. So not at the end of the line, but within it. And part of what makes that so great is you can almost see, like when you're reading from the book, you can almost see where breaths are meant to be taken and what runs into what followed, like what preceded it, which I think is just fantastic. And it makes it feel more connected and coherent throughout because it is free form. Now meter, I've had to put a humble reminder for myself because I often mess this up. Meter is the basic rhythmic structure of a verse or lines in a verse. And it's in free verse, so it's really hard to tie down. But every once in a while, there's a lot of punchy, powerful lines that are built off of playing with the free verse form, right? So you can kind of build up and down like a roller coaster throughout. And as I read that earlier, I hope you felt where she was intending some of the emphasis to go. In the little section I have here, let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried. You know, it's being set up in the first line. The following ones follow a similar structure. It brings emphasis to those matching pairs. It brings significant buildup, and then it releases into the next section, which I didn't include. But themes, right? This is one of my favorite parts of, I would say, pulling apart poetry. I had a teacher once who told me you never want to tie a piece of literature to a chair and beat it out of recognition to the point where it no longer looks like what you came into. There's a certain level where you have to back off, stop analyzing it, and just let it exist. So that's why I'm finishing on theme, because between rhyme and meter, that's plenty. I don't want to beat this to death. But you know, throughout the poem, it's light and dark, rebuilding, repairing, recovering. There's a lot of language like that that's all about restoration, unity, bringing people together, listing off parts of the country that wouldn't necessarily get along on everything, trying to use that as a call to unify the future. That's a huge theme throughout the entire poem, because the past, as she puts it, is what impacts the future generation, right? Justice, that's a huge theme to bring up. Yeah, you know, some would call it controversial, you know, in my international friend groups, to stand on the Capitol and talk about justice. But, as an American, we have a sense of justice that we think, could be changed and could be improved, regardless of what side on the political aisle we're on. The hill we climb, that's the name of the poem. The hill is all the stuff leading before this theme, right? Going from the darkness to the light, rebuilding, taking the challenge on of being better than who we were as a country before. Hope is a theme. It's very small. There's only a couple lines on it in the end, but it's where she's making her point, right? The final, I guess, if we're thinking roller coaster still, the final release, when you finally get back to the landing part, you're getting off of the roller coaster, you're so relieved. Hope as a relief is inspiring. It's a perfect thing for the stage she was performing on. Climate, it's in there. It's very vague, slightly in there. And then humanity's challenge, the hill, as we said before. So then the other one I wanted to do, which is much shorter, as you can see here, is this one called Libations, after Layli Long Soldier. I wanted to, tip my hat for a couple of reasons to this one. I think Libations is a great name for the poem that she put here, because one of the definitions of the three is a beverage, and especially an intoxicating beverage. To me, this is an intoxicating poem because of what I'm going to tell you in the next slide after we read it. But Layli Long Soldier is an Oglala Lakota poet, writer, feminist, artist, and activist. I believe that part of the point of referencing this here, I like the idea that she was inspired by this person. I'm not sure if after Layli Long Soldier indicates that she's no longer with us, or if it's in her style or something along those lines. I need to look into that myself. I spend more time reading the book than researching the person, unfortunately. But the fun thing about this, structure and function wise, is freedom and options. So I'll go ahead and read it. Libations by Amanda Gorman. Today, as we speak to the past, the pain, the pandem, we call out, we carry on, we arc, we move, remembering, renaming, resisting, repairing, rousing our world, like haunts, like holes, like humans, loosening, lighting our mouths home. So just from a couple of literary devices in play here, we've got mirrored phrases, alliteration, and then the last one is something that I think is at play here, but I'm not certain if it's an actual literary device. I'm calling it routes for reading. So I've kind of mangled this. I'm sorry if the lines aren't clear. I did my best, but the thing that I think makes this an intoxicating beverage of a poem is the fact that you can choose to read it in your own way. I don't know if that was the intended goal, but you have an amount of choice and there's still constraint. The beginning and end is a set border, but the way you get there, you have options, right? I think that's intriguing. So an alternative way to read this would be today, so I'll be going down the left mostly. Today, as we listen to the past, we call out, remembering our world, like haunts loosening our mouths home. That is a completely different poem than the entirety taken up at once, right? And then the green line is just going to be me going through the other side. So today, as we speak to the pandem, we move, rousing our world, like humans lighting our mouths home. And you could take any permutation of this. I'll take it back to the last one. You can take any permutation of this and make a poem of another meaning out of it. You can bring your own path and choices into it, which I think is fascinating because I've not read a poem that gives you options. You're usually subjected to the will of the author. I'm not sure if this was the intended goal, but it's what I received from it when I read it. So you have options, but the end is guaranteed. And then with that's all I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss, Amanda Gorman's work. I have read some of the other poems. I didn't include them because I figured between The Hill We Climb and this one, that's plenty to go about. So thank you for your time.
Wow, that was great. Any questions for
Yay.
John or comments?
No, thank you. That was very interesting.
I loved what you said about the title because when you were reading the poem and my memory of hearing her read it, at the inauguration, I remember as she read it, and you're right, her style and her hand movements and everything were in that moment what they were. And when you read it, you gave your voice to her words too. So I'm putting all that in my mind together as you were reading it, all those memories and how you were reading it. And I remember during the inauguration feeling like so much of what she actually said was almost quite depressing or scary even to think
Mhm.
about. And yet, she was talking about the hill we climb as Americans. This hill is all the obstacles to make our country better, right? In all
Mhm.
these different ways she talks about. And so I love the fact that you address that because I think titles of poems are sometimes so important to give your reader something to kind of cling to when the going gets rough, And then
Yeah.
what you said about how at the very end there's just little drops of hope, there's just a couple little things of hope, but it's enough, right? It's enough.
Mhm.
So that to me was really interesting. And that second poem, your analysis of it blew me away. But I also loved what you said about her use of rhyme and stress for effect. And isn't it interesting that that can come across on the page as a person's reading it, even if you'd never heard the poem out loud? I think that that's a real talent for a poet to be able to create something. And she certainly did that, does that with her poetry to create something that people can read and still get the rhythm, the rhyme, and the stress for effect. That was a good analysis, John. Good job.
Thank you.
Wasn't really a question though. Sorry.
That was great. Now, did she recently have another book come out, like within the last couple of weeks?
There was a children's book that I actually had that I ordered. I did what Johnny did. I ordered this a year or so ago, right after the inauguration. And I also ordered her children's book and had it sent to my grandson's house. But I don't know if there's another compilation of her more, everybody's poetry, adult poetry. But Sarah
Hmm.
E., what did you say in the chat?
I want to try to write a choose your own adventure poem as well.
I know it sounds like so much fun. And like you could even borrow the structure, right? So you could go for the diamond, you could have the couplets at the end, and you could have the one unifying line where she had our world over and over. And you
Mhm.
could do so much with that. It's fascinating. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of other like shapes that could work too. Like what if
Yeah.
you start wide and come in thin and then come back wide on the end? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of the moments of unity, but you're right. The unity could be somewhere in the middle as well.
yeah.
Sarah,
Hourglass figure.
yeah, Sarah E., since you're becoming the queen of three-dimensional poetry, I can see you doing a three-dimensional diamond that, has two sides on each, like if it was made out of paper or something, both sides of the paper would have completely different poems on them in all
I'm
kinds of
very
routes.
tempted.
All kinds of routes. You could do it. I know you could do it.
Yeah, that was cool. I'd never seen that poem, so that was really neat to see, John.
Yeah, I
I'm
really like
glad you enjoyed it.
that was a
I
good
like
choice,
that.
and seeing the diamond shape visually like that was really kind of cool too, especially after the first poem was such, like a long free verse poem. To see something that had like a diamond structure was like, wow, I mean,
And the book's full of stuff like that throughout. And what I always find fascinating is like there's another one called Earth Eyes it's a shape poem, right?
mhm,
It's in the shape of an eye.
wow,
But it's not a pick your adventure kind of poem. It reads a lot more like a piece of prose, to be honest. But throughout the entire thing, she's playing with structure and even punctuation. Like there's one that has like like a check mark list at the top
oh wow,
that sets the stage, and then it goes into the actual rest of the poem. So I highly recommend it. There's even one that it it looks like a conversation in a text message chain, but it's poetry. It's just in those bubbles, like the
yeah,
chat bubbles. Um, yeah, so Call Us What We Carry, Amanda Gorman, highly recommend it. Oh,
Great
someone in the
job.
chat just dropped some knowledge on us.
Nancy, what was that
Could be that the
knowledge?
shape was a honor to the original poet, a shield, or dreamweaver,
Yeah.
which could very well be. I like that.
Mhm. Maryland's asked what was the name of the poem with the shape bubbles?
Libations.
No, the
Oh,
one you were
the
talking about with
shape bubbles. Sorry. Let me find it real quick. I'll put it in the chat so we
Okay.
can move on.
Yeah, I don't have my book
Well-
in front of me.
So in general, John, what strikes you the most about the poems of Amanda Gorman as a whole? Just if you were to kind of generalize what really impresses you the most, you may have already said it, but if you could just kind of give us your opinion of what really wows you in general after reading several of a collection of pieces by her.
It's fun to, I'd say probably my favorite thing about her is, in the past when I've studied other authors and made a point to get familiar with a lot of their work, it's like sometimes you lose their voice as they kind of play with different structures and approaches to poetry. Like say you read someone and the only book you've ever known is always in the same kind of I would say like bucket of structures, right? And then suddenly you read something of theirs that's like free verse or haikus, and you're totally thrown off because you feel like their voice has changed. I feel like when I read her stuff, there's no like loss of voice throughout each like form, which is, I don't know, to me weird. Not weird in a bad way, but weird in a fascinating way. Because like I feel like I lose my voice as I go from a different like structure when I write. Like if I'm writing a haiku, I'm like, that doesn't even sound like me. Like half the time I'm like totally like it's too limiting. I don't know if I like it, and then I'll read it and I'll be like, actually, I like that, but is that still me, or is that just haiku, John? Like how does that work?
I like that.
but-
Haiku John.
Yeah, and the name of the one with the chat bubbles is called At First.
At first. Okay.
Yeah. In the book on page 9.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the fact that her voice carries through, and usually, you can feel like the silly moments as well as the like deeply troubling ones. Because the the one At First has pretty dark language use, but it's still rather silly in a way. It has emojis in it, like italics for emphasis, double consonant work. So like there's a line that's an italicized that was sick, and it's got 2 C's and 2 K's and an exclamation point. Like it's intended to be somewhat silly because of the I feel like you get poetic license from using chat bubbles to get a little silly.
Yeah.
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 Even when you're talking about fairly dark stuff.
I think it's very interesting that she did use all those kind of, oh God, I'm so old. I don't know what to call it, like modern communication
Yeah, like new media.
language. Yeah, new media and even like phrases that are, like us old people would say some in the old days we'd say it was hip or cool. And now there's all kinds of words. People say sick and that means it's good, right? If it's sick.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really neat that as a younger poet, she works all that into her poetry effectively without losing the wider audience of anybody. She makes those things, she normalizes those things in her writing, in her poetry, and I think that's one of the things about her that I kind of admire so much, because it's really easy to keep writing in the same style and in the same kind of almost using the same phrases that you've used before, because that's your comfort zone. That's that phrase works for you, that it expresses what you mean. She's found fresh new ways to kind of, invigorate her poetry with some modern techniques and things that I think she does that really well. And she's not heavy-handed with it. It's, for certain poems and in certain poems of hers and stuff. So I found that to be kind of an interesting part of reading her poetry too.
Yeah, but kind of in the same vein, like when a musician who's done music for 10 years or something, they've always made some kind of pop music. They suddenly come out with a record that's like in a completely off genre, like
Yeah.
they do something, I don't know, a little bit
Do a
more rock and
solo album
roll.
and suddenly
Or,
you're like,
yeah,
who is
and
that?
Yeah, like I remember fondly, there's this band that I liked that was kind of experimental called System of a Down. They're from like the 90s and stuff. Their main, like one of the main vocalists did a spin-off thing of his own, and he's classically trained in opera.
Wow.
And I became exposed to this weird lane of opera music in my early 20s, which I didn't expect to happen. Like
your
and
grandpa would be proud. He
but
loved
it's
opera.
weird. Yeah, but it's weird, right? You don't expect that
Yeah.
from a person, and when a poet can pull that off, that's awesome.
Yeah. I
but-
like that. I like that. Something I found out recently that I didn't know was you're talking about musicians who can sometimes use they've written a lot of things and they kind of can echo that in their work sometimes. And I found out that, everybody knows the James Bond theme, right? For the movies, the music that plays, the James Bond theme.
Yeah.
The guy that wrote that actually, the budget for the film was so low, they didn't really pay him very much. And so, but he agreed to do it because the producers flew him to where they were filming in the Caribbean, and so he got a free trip to the Caribbean basically. And the theme, this was the funny part, he basically just lifted most of the theme comes from a composition that he had previously done years before. So it's not an entirely original, it's his music, it's his original because he wrote
But he's
the
drawing
original.
from
But
source material.
He flat out says he lifted, it was just, he just adapted it to a new, slightly different way and said, here's your movie theme. And I mean, the moment those notes hit the theaters, that became one of the most famous, well-known, recognizable movie themes ever. And it's just so funny that it was just kind of like, oh, free trip to Jamaica or wherever, and here's your theme. I wrote it years ago, So, and sorry, that kind of strayed from your original point, but I thought that was kind of funny that even musicians, even famous things that we've heard over all our lives have interesting stories behind them. I think Amanda Gorman, as young as she is, it's amazing how deep her poetry, can reach into all of us. She's an amazing writer, definitely, but it makes me wonder a lot about her life. And I only get interested in the lives of poets whose poetry I really, really love. Other poetry that I like, I may not ever wonder anything about the person who wrote that poem, but I might just like that poem. But if I really get into someone's poetry, I want to know a lot about them because, it's that key. What makes them so great? How'd they get there?
Well, that reminds me of another question I had in reading a lot of Amanda's poems. In The Hill We Climb, she talks about the skinny black girl who dreamed of being president and then finds herself reading for a president. Does she talk about herself? Does she reference herself
in like
very
a
much
leadership kind
in
of?
her? Well, just about herself. Does she talk about herself in her poems very much, or is it more, is it more
Like implied, I guess.
Generalized, maybe. So
Yeah,
more
like
more
kind of
third
any
person.
skinny black girl, or are things more specific to her life?
I mean, does
Yes.
she share personal experience as personal experience, I guess, is or so it sounds like it's personal experience. Does she do any of that along the way, or
kind of like there's a few where you think to yourself, maybe she's speaking in first person, but she does make a formal point throughout, which is one of the consistent things, is it's usually more about a we or a they. It's not so much an I or a me. You know what I mean? The voicing is a little distant. But on occasion, like I'm trying to find this one. Should have done more bookmarks.
You'd bookmark every page. I know how that goes.
Yeah, it's bad.
Well, while you're hunting, I'll vamp a minute and just tell everybody, when the formal presentation part's over, you can unmute and chime in. You don't have to be muted anymore. It's just when the person is doing the formal presentation, I usually ask people to mute so the recording is good, sound wise. I mean, but everybody can unmute.
Just a moment to say I really appreciate being in this meeting. I'll be muted most of the time because I have small children who keep
Oh.
getting up.
Well, we love small children.
Totally understandable.
Yep. Some of us have had them. Some of us still do. So.
I don't think I met you. Do I know you?
I've emailed you, but you have not seen me. This is my first meeting I've attended. I'm Morgan Galvin.
Oh, hi,
Welcome,
Morgan.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Mike. Who is Galaxy
A10E?
I know. I've been wondering that too.
It's Hacker Man. I mean, yeah, it's mostly
Galaxy.
it's mostly we's and they's, and that's the thing. Like, I think she's almost made this like weird jump from speaking about herself directly to doing it more indirectly, right? I think when you root most of your content in schools of thought like feminism or race theory or those kind of areas, like you typically will focus on the larger scope, not so much the individual experience, and that does come out. But there are certain poems in there where you'll kind of feel as though there's a little more to it. It is a little bit more personal for her in this one, but yeah, I don't know if that's a generalization, but
I think that's really interesting too, given how young she is, because I think,
well, I think age and having lived a life don't really overlap, because there are people younger than probably everyone in the room who have had way harder lives than
that's not what I
people in the
meant,
room.
but I
No,
agree
know,
with
but
I agree with
that's
you
just,
on that.
yeah, like for her age, yes, she has a very like deep sense of doom and gloom and hope and inspiring nature. But what's the phrase they always called me when I was growing up? An old soul.
Yeah.
They do exist, reincarnation beliefs or not. Like,
Yeah.
so
I meant more like at her age to be able to write poetry that has that more universal feel and can reach individuals, because it's not a I me kind of story.
oh, so you're saying it's like a
meant the
mature voicing.
technique. Yeah,
Okay,
I
yeah.
meant more. But what you're saying is absolutely true. Age doesn't matter. A 10-year-old who's had traumatic things happen can write better poems than I could or whatever. Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. But what I meant was more just being able to write that way technically is
Yeah.
something that I find it very impressive for her age, for any age, but especially for her age, because I struggle with that. Sometimes I want to write a poem that's grounded in an experience of mine or a feeling I have, but I don't want to write it me. I want to write it in a more general way. And one of the only techniques I know is to turn it into a he, she, or to do it in third person. And that's not really as effective as sometimes going even further, which is what I think Amanda Gorman does so beautifully. She goes even further than just changing the pronoun, if you will. She really has a technique that I admire.
One of the other things that I found fascinating was
Skill,
she grew up with a I don't know if it's an auditory disability, but it's like a speech impediment thing, and she did coaching most of her youth to like work on that and
Wow.
be able to speak more eloquently without the impairment, and making that problematic. And for someone to go through all that and not be a conversational person, I don't know her personally. Yeah, that's it. But but like, how do you call it? If you go through all that training to be able to speak, you obviously want to use your voice. And I think being able to speak from a, us and they, kind of that distanced first, whatever you want to call that, those plurals, being able to do that probably has some roots in, probably knowing a lot of people. I mean, it doesn't say online when she started writing, or, I don't know how social of a person she is, but in my mind, it stands to reason that someone who can speak for the experiences of many must know many people, right? You can't assume that kind of stuff. Okay. So Marilyn chimed in that Layli Long Soldier and many of her poems do have unusual shapes.
Interesting.
So that probably leans into the diamond, why it is what it is.
Yeah. What a fun presentation.
Yeah,
What
I'm
a
glad
good-
you all enjoyed
What
it.
a good discussion too.
Yeah.
Now I just want to write shape poetry and take routes, strange routes, and I'm all inspired.
Yes, thank you, John.
My pleasure.